All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials Are Old podcast. And you know what, Brian?
Yes, Taylor, it's
Are
an
you,
aesthetic choice.
Brian, are you okay? It sounds like you're speaking from maybe the afterlife. Are you all right, man?
It's fucking lit. It's so fucking hard.
Well, Brian, I think you may be speaking from the realm of where a lot of celebrities may
Shut the
be at the
fuck
moment.
up.
Whoa, which is I'm sorry. I was just sipping on this drink. I don't know what happened. I got out my grape juice and I took a sip and something came over me.
Oh shit, man. Are you all right? What you're drinking lean now? Is that what you're saying?
No, it's just grape juice.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. I was a little bit worried, Brian, that you were falling into the maybe rapper lifestyle of drinking lean, because that's what it sounded like there. You sound like you were dying.
It didn't sound hard. Did that sound really scary to you?
It really did. It almost sounded like maybe you were doing a little bit of like SoundCloud rapping a little bit, maybe a little bit of that going on.
As an aging millennial, I'm quite familiar with making weird, bad music in my bedroom that nobody likes, that's not mixed, that's constantly peeking into the red.
Well, Brian, I think you could describe a lot of SoundCloud rappers like that. Maybe like early XXXTentacion, maybe a little bit, right? That kind of style.
Really, virtually all of them. At least that is the common perception, right, of cloud rap, which is why I wanted to pick that in specifically, like you said, XXXTentacion as a subject to wrap up our new metal revival series. Maybe my favorite series we've ever done. It's up there for me with the Billy Jack one. It's obviously very relevant to old millennials, but I wanted to cap it with someone kind of a little bit weirder.
Yes. So just to clarify here, we're going to be reviewing the comp Look at Me, which is the, I believe, final compilation from XX at the moment, if I'm not
I think it's
mistaken.
his only proper compilation. So here's the deal with this album. I don't typically want to do compilations, but X's proper albums are so fucking short. They're like 17 to 25 minutes each. Also, he kind of does a bunch of different shit, but he never does it all on one proper album. So this compilation was put together as a companion piece for a documentary about him. So it's an attempt to show all sides of him, in a kind of linear way. I don't know if it entirely works, but that's why I picked it for an entry point, because Taylor, I know you're not all that familiar with X. This seemed like the best one to throw someone into, to say, like, this is all of the stuff this guy's about. Typically, I wouldn't pick a comp, though.
No, for sure. Like we've only reviewed albums so far. Well, to be fair, we've also reviewed comedy albums, but they're not compilations. They're albums, like
Yeah.
cohesive albums. This is the first compilation
Yeah.
we're reviewing. So before we get into the track listing or anything, which we're not going to get into a comprehensive track listing because there is no comprehensive track listing. It's all pretty
Yeah,
nebulous.
this is a little different. So I don't want to sit here and say there isn't stuff to talk about in the tracks. And I'm going to say right off the bat, well, we're going to talk about how he's a bad guy. He's a bad piece of shit. Hard for me to feel bad for him. Very abusive, monstrous guy. I do like a lot of his music, but sometimes it is hard to find stuff to say about because he basically has three modes. And once you've talked about every mode, you kind of know what he's doing.
Yes, and before we get into that real quick, I just have a couple details to get over here. So, as you mentioned, this is Look at Me. This is the companion piece for a documentary, which I watched about 5 minutes of the documentary, and it humanized him a little bit because we're certainly going to talk a little bit about, I shouldn't even say a little bit, a lot of it about how this guy was a fucking asshole in real life. But it did humanize him a little bit more than I was expecting, and it didn't make me appreciate his music more, but it gave me a little bit more sympathy for him. I mean, I shouldn't say that too much because he was a horrible narcissist, so that would just be enabling him to a certain extent.
Well, I mean, he's dead, so you can't really enable him now. But the thing with the humanizing him thing is because we had a longer break than usual between episodes, and I was on vacation while doing prep work for this. I had way more time to do prep work for this. So I listened to like every X interview I could find. I listened to interviews with his mom and with the girlfriend that he fucking abused in really monstrous ways. And with a lot of his fans, I ended up doing a lot more research about him than I normally have time to. And I don't want to say I feel sympathy for him. He was an adult. At a certain point, your choices are old. But coming into this, and this is the last time I'll say it, because again, I don't want to sympathize with this guy too much. Horribly, physically, mentally abusive, cult-like narcissist. This is basically a child who was like institutionalized pretty much his whole life and then thrust into stardom. Obviously, not everyone that happens to is going to do the things he did, but I also saw, you see people on Twitter or whatever. I remember even when X died, people being like, well, I don't care that he died. And it's like, I don't know. That's always a weird response when you're talking about someone this young and who had like, I don't particularly care that he died, but I'm not happy that like a 20-year-old or 21-year-old had to lived the life that he did and ended up where he ended
100%.
up,
100%. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where it is tragic to a certain extent, but I will say that, at least in my opinion, having done a lot of research, I knew a little bit about X before then, but just hearing a lot of the things that he did to people, I'm like, is the world really worse off for him being dead? I'm going to be real here.
Yeah,
I'm going to say it's better or worse, but is it really that worse off for him being dead? I'm going to be real here because like I genuinely think he would have probably killed somebody at some point.
I mean, he could have, because I'm not, like I don't feel qualified to make quite that assertion. Like I said, I don't feel so sick because again, like at a certain point, you're an adult, your choices are your own. I guess obviously the culprit is first and foremost X. I mean, and I don't actually, I read a lot about the specific details of things he did, and I don't really want to talk about them on the show because it's pretty lurid and not good. But one of the things that's interesting to me, and you had kind of asked me about this when we started this, is like the younger people, like kind of like younger millennials and like Zoomers, a lot of them, they love X. For a lot of them, he is kind of like their Kurt Cobain. Some people kind of like to hand wring about that and find that really disturbing. I don't particularly, kids like edgy, fucked up guy. That's misguided, but they do. But I do think it's interesting that so many people have such a positive response to this guy who, first of all, a bad guy, but more importantly, for our purposes, a weird figure to be so popular in music.
Yeah, no, totally. And I have a couple things when it comes to the Kurt Cobain comparison, but I do want to get into the details of this comp real quick. So came out in 2022, along with obviously the documentary we were mentioning earlier. It was produced by a lot of people, and I'm not going to get into all of them because every track has a different fucking producer outside of a couple notable ones here. John Cunningham was his like most prominent producer here on this album, and I assume probably his most prominent overall because he was featured pretty prominently in the documentary there.
Yeah.
It was released on Bad Vibes Forever and Columbia Records. It's 57 minutes and 49 seconds long. It's 25 tracks. So that means it's an average of like 2 minutes per fucking track here. And some of them are even shorter than that. Like, honestly, the problem that I have with X more than anything else, well, number one is narcissist lyrics, because they are nauseating. As a 31-year-old man, his narcissist lyrics are so fucking horrid to me. I hate them so much. But the thing that bothers me so much about these songs, they're also fucking short. That it's like, I'm trying to get a vibe here, and it's like a minute long, and I'm like, what the fuck are you trying to go for?
I don't know how much like current like hip hop you end up hearing, Taylor. That is like what most rap is now. It's all like a minute and a half long songs.
Jesus
it's
Christ.
Fucking weird to me. It's so weird to me.
Bring back Rapper's Delight or something. I mean, Jesus Christ, like get some longer motherfucking songs. This shit sucks.
Well, like that all goes back to like the SoundCloud is still like a thing, but it's not the thing it was like at X's peak, a few years ago. But that's kind of the start of that. Like that's actually seeped into like rock music and pop music now. You'll get these like 2 minute or 1 minute 50 like rock songs now. And that goes back to, cloud rap and probably to the success of X in particular. Because the idea of being a hit artist with like 1 minute long songs making up your album, 20 years ago would have seemed insane.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely fucking nuts to me that people resonate with this so much. Never mind. I got one more thing here. So I was not able to find any Amazon reviews. You tend to do that a lot, Brian, is you tend to pick things that either have very little or no Amazon reviews. And this is the second thing we've ever reviewed that had no Amazon reviews or ratings on Amazon, which is fucking hilarious. And on Rate Your Music, it has a 3.08 out of 5. So I decided not to do Amazon reviews because, of course, we don't have Amazon reviews. But I did find one Rate Your Music review. And we've never actually done a Rate Your Music review, and I was kind of surprised. They were a lot smarter than the Amazon reviews. So I found one here. I want to highlight it real quick. So, and this is going to get into a lot of our opinions on this album, but I do want to highlight what other people think because I think a lot of people have very similar opinions on X than we do. I mean, obviously we're in the distinct minority on not necessarily liking him because, last time I checked, he has 40 million subscribers on YouTube, and I'm sure he probably has around 100 million unique listeners on fucking Spotify every month. So needless to say, he resonates with a lot of people.
I almost wonder if his most devoted fans are not necessarily people that write music reviews.
No,
definitely a lot of people on message boards that talk about X, but I don't know if someone that is a huge X fan was going to sit and like write a review or do a podcast about him.
Well, and that's the thing I think, though, is that, like, along with, obviously early grunge and stuff like that, it was a very populist, like, SoundCloud rap is, like, very populist.
Yeah.
Whereas, obviously, more traditional albums and cohesive, fucking, like I said, cohesive albums are not necessarily not populist, but SoundCloud is pretty much the most populist form of music you can fucking make these days, it seems like. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's just not a lot of professional people talking about this kind of stuff. It's more of people, like, casual music listeners, sometimes very intense music listeners, because when I went in the Genius annotations for this thing, people are really fucking obsessed with this. And to me, I think it's absolutely bonkers. Because, like, once again, I'm a 31-year-old man. I don't do drugs. I'm not suicidal. I'm not nihilistic. So none of this really appeals to me. But I guess if you're a certain kind of, like, burnout 16-year-old, I guess this might appeal to you.
I'm a little too old for this to hit really. Like the narcissistic stuff, I don't like it. It also doesn't bother me in the same way, which I'm not saying is like good of me, but just like I hear that and I go, oh, that's nasty. But it doesn't really affect the times when it affects my enjoyment of the music is like when it's stupid, when the writing is so bad. But as far as like it being offensive, that doesn't quite register with me. I think I'd like the songs better if they weren't like that.
The thing is, though, Brian, the reason it's offensive to me, though, is because a lot of the lyrics here are explicitly written about him saying, oh, whoa, sorry, it's me, after hurting women and other people. These are nasty, awful lyrics.
Yeah. I'm not disagreeing. Like, when I hear that, though, it doesn't... And I'm like that with a lot of music. Like, I listen to, like, Gigi Allen and R. Kelly and a lot of awful people. And that's just not the way my brain processes music when I'm listening to it.
Listen, if I didn't even know the backstory behind a lot of these songs, I'd be like, okay, it's a little weird. It's not for me.
You'd be like, it's whiny. You'd be like, it's whiny. And yeah.
But knowing that these are like actually based on real things that he did, and he wants you to feel sorry for him getting the just desserts for the awful shit that he did, really lands like a fucking turd in my lap. It's so bad, dude. It really pissed me off, to be honest with you. Listen, I understand he's violent and antisocial, fucking nihilist, or he was, I should say. He's been dead for a long time now, but he was mostly a child, right? He died when he was 20 years old. He spent the vast majority of his life as a child. So I'm trying to look a little bit past that, but like I said, a lot of the lyrics on this are fucking nasty and they piss me off.
I'm not saying that you or anyone should look past them. I'm not making that argument. So one of the things that I always think about music and any sort of art, whether it's the art itself is problematic or it's made by like a reprehensible person, such as in this case, is my take on art that's either by offensive people or the art itself is offensive. And that's the case. Both of those things are true with this art, is that the most like dangerous thing is, I think, because you like something or even because you like think it's all right. Like I would say in the general sense, I'm like a fan of X's music, right? Like I can listen to it and I can appreciate it and I find it interesting, like in a way that I like to think about it and things and think about like what, like I think he was doing a pretty distinct thing, but I think it's important to listen to that and go like, well, I can feel that way. I understand what these lyrics are. I understand the function that they were serving, that for someone like this to put them out there and what it was communicating to his fans and to his victims. The thing that I found that I really did not like was when I would hear things by his fans, and what you see a lot is from people, and usually some of them are maybe our age, they're usually a lot younger, are like, well, the way that he spoke so bluntly about like trauma and mental illness was really important to me or whatever. But I feel like the danger in that, which is all fine. Like, I don't care if people feel that way. Like I said, I listen to all kinds of fucked up music, and I think your relationship with art is your own, doesn't need to be defined by how you feel about the artist per se. But the thing that bothers me, I guess, is people, because they like music, hearing it and going and like not believing that he did those things. Like they can't compartmentalize things in that way. Do you know what I mean?
I went on the comment section on the documentary for this album, and there were a couple people who were like, oh, well, they highlighted the abusive stuff. And they actually did highlight the abusive stuff in the documentary, at least a little bit that I saw, which is great. But I saw every once in a while I'd see comments like, oh, he didn't do any of that. And thankfully, at least in the YouTube comment section, people are calling him out like, no, he clearly did that shit. Like nobody, there is no obfuscation in real life about all the awful shit that he did. It's all extremely well fucking documented. He had documented it himself by him talking about it.
Yeah, he was on FaceTime all the time talking about fucking like just beating up his fucking ex, like choking her out and shit. He was on FaceTime all the time, which is another.
He even did that shit to his fans. He would beat up some of his fans and like some of his haters and fucking like it's crazy.
to finish up my thought, I think like that, I think is the danger. Like, I think people can listen to anything or watch any movie, no matter, almost no matter how offensive it is. And they're probably fine as long as they recognize what they're consuming. Like, you can watch or listen to something that's really toxic and coming from some dark place. And I think that's usually fine until you refuse to acknowledge what you're seeing, right?
And that's the thing, though. I think to be fair, obviously, I don't know any X fans in real life. Like, I don't see people going around talking about how X changed their life in real life. But the vast majority of ones online, they seem fucking delusional. They seem fucking delusional and immature.
What's the truth of online always is that you always are going to see like the stupidest and most obnoxious people because they're the people that are bothering to post online. Because I would say I know some people like in real life who are pretty big X fans and who listened to him when they were young and he was popping off. And they're, he's just a guy they listened to. They don't have any sort of need to defend him or anything. And that tends to be who I encounter in real life are just people who are like, it's music I listen to. We could argue about whether that's okay or not. But what I see online, is people who seem, again, there's this a thing. I mean, it's funny because it was like this while he was alive, but it continues to be. There is something like cult-like about XXXTentacion, about him always being on FaceTime, him always posting, always putting things out, always being accessible and in contact with his fan base. And like them having this, like, it does seem like people felt like they needed to like be hearing from him and talking to him. He has fans that he would talk to like all day long. People that he would like talk to on FaceTime. It's so fucking weird.
Yeah, God. But, speaking of stupid people posting online, I meant to get to the fucking Rate Your Music review, so let's just get into this real quick. So, no, it's all good. So, the biggest Jacob gives us 3.5 stars, because they actually have half stars in Rate Your Music. And the body of the review says, "Look at Me, the album is a retrospective collection released in conjunction with the Look at Me Hulu documentary about X's tragically short life. It delineates between his underground days, in parentheses, dubbed Look at Me Then, and his period of mainstream success, in parentheses, Look at Me Now. To present his greatest hits along with notable rarities. Look at Me is probably as good as it gets for a single collection of X's music. It captures his clear strengths, a talent for blending genres, a penchant for writing memorable melodies, and his ability to channel his emotions into hook-driven songs. The song selection is generally solid, although Look at Me Now section is a bit too brief. It collects all of the main songs from Question Mark, but could have easily added another song or two from 17, and it should have at least added Whoa, Mind in Awe, or What Are You So Afraid Of from the underrepresented Skins album. The Look at Me Then section also has a few duds, though these provide interesting perspective on X's starting point as an artist and his growth. As an individual, X was provocative and controversial. Look at Me, the album summarizes the highlights of his short career and makes the case for his musical talent. So I don't know if I entirely agree with that. I think it's an okay compilation, but like I said, a lot of the songs on here very much emphasize his whiny narcissist stuff. I actually like the songs on here that really focus on his actual like non-narcissist writing skills, because I think he was actually a pretty good writer, at least on that front.
So I think this is the best possible like greatest hits compilation you can do for X. The thing with X's output is he was extremely prolific. And not only that, but he would delete albums just from his online catalog a lot. So a lot of that stuff is just lost. And he also has a lot of incomplete albums. So it's really hard to go through all of this output of this kind of unfocused but very prolific output and go like, well, what's an hour-long album we make out of this, and show everything and make it cohesive and make it kind of feel like it fits some sort of narrative. I think they did probably the best possible way they could. So what I think this album does pretty well is obviously that it's the best possible entry point for X. The low point for me is, like I said, it's not really the narcissist lyrics, that it's toxic and it's bad, but it doesn't really take away from me from the listening to it. On just an artistic level, the short songs, when it's this many of them in a row, it drives me crazy. And I like a good number of these songs, or at least I think a lot of these songs, to me, they feel like sketches. It feels like him recording an idea so he can come back to it later. And that might be me showing my age, because like I said, a lot of music in general is like 1:50 now. And I do listen to a lot of those tracks when like young rappers come out and they drop a single and it's 1:30. I'm like, okay, that's fine. It's a little short, not what I'm used to. But when you're listening to a whole album of it, and then when a track does hit and then it's over, you're kind of like, okay, like, what was this? Was that the whole song? Is that all you wanted to do? And I guess also I find it distracting. He's really good he was great at mixing genres, but it kind of seems like this compilation, it never quite settles on a flow. I know they did the look at me then, look at me now thing, but as far as like a mood flowing throughout the album and developing, it doesn't really, it kind of just jumps around, which is a little distracting. One thing I would say about X's proper albums, the few that he does have, as short as they are, is that they do have a mood and like a narrative, which I don't really feel like this album maintains.
No, exactly. And, we talked about this 25 tracks. It's a little under an hour long. It's one of those things where this is, I think, pretty much the only album we're ever going to review that we're not going to go at least somewhat track through track, because there's just so many tracks. A lot of them just, there's not a lot to say. I'll be honest, I didn't like the vast majority of these tracks. There are some that I do really, really like. Two of them I really want to highlight, actually, in my personal opinion, are the literal last two tracks. I actually really liked these songs quite a bit, which were Train Food and True Love. And those are the two songs to me that, especially Train Food, really is one of those things where, like,
I like Train Food. That's one of my favorite songs that he's ever done.
Why the fuck was this not, why were there, I should clarify, because I am not a X fan, obviously, but Brian, were there more songs that he did like Train Food?
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff, especially when you look at his cloud singles. Rare has a lot of stuff like this. Rare is an EP he did. If you look at 17 has a couple of tracks like this. So I actually do like X's music. It doesn't all work it doesn't always come together for me, but I do think he did a lot of interesting things. He is a case of someone where, like, I can't really think, you might disagree with this, Taylor. I can't really think of any other artist that mixes these sounds quite the way he did, and definitely not someone that does it as effectively. Not that he always did it super effectively, but I think in comparison to his peers and people who have tried to copy him, I think he did it in a more interesting way.
It's actually really interesting. So, we talked about, obviously, we have Train Food, like I said, is a song really like about the contemplation of like fucking like mortality and stuff like that.
Yeah.
He was very much into the occult to a certain extent. He also talked about genres. He had, everything from like rock inspired tracks to, there's a couple on here that sound like it could have been fucking like Death Grips beat. There's like sad piano ballads that you might hear on like a fucking Evanescence album. Like there's a lot of musical diversity here. And I think it's at least interesting. But once again, the problem is, and I think that really stops me from enjoying this, is once again, of course, his just awful personal self. That is, his lyrics are just so overwhelmingly like personal, and obviously a lot of these are victim blaming shit in here that really pisses me off.
Oh yeah, they are.
Who has dated a lot of abused women, it shit really fucking pisses me off hearing that shit. But also the other one is just, once again, these songs are way too short. For me, they don't establish enough of a mood for me to even get interested in the fucking first place. Like, I'm sorry, if you're gonna have like a piano ballad, sort of somber song, or like a Death Grip song, at least for me, I think they need to be at least 3.5, 4 minutes for me to at least get something out of it. But if they're 1.5, 2 minutes, that's not enough time for me to establish anything. So I'm not interested in it. I'm sorry.
That makes sense. I don't quite feel that. Like, I still like a lot of those tracks. I just feel like, and I feel like maybe because we're getting old. Because I do think, like, well, if I like a song, I want it to be at least a little bit longer. Like, a minute long is not long enough for me to properly enjoy something if I'm liking it. Again, I will say his proper albums, pretty consistent narrative moods. I don't think you'd necessarily like them more, but for whatever that's worth. But that's part of the problem with trying to make a compilation about someone like this. What I kind of thought, because I agreed with you, I didn't want to do a track by track on this, mostly because the songs are too short. Not that I don't think there's anything to say about them, but I was more interested in kind of talking about his weird outsized influence on modern popular music. So what I basically did is, as I did my last few listens, I listened to this album a lot over the last week and a half, whatever, is I kind of noticed, as diverse as he is, and he kind of has three main modes on this album. So you've got your blown out, bass heavy, really distorted, really fried sounding beats where he's basically shouting. Those are some of my favorite tracks on this album. This would be, for instance, like a track like Fuck, which he did with Ski Mask the Slump God. I'm Sipping Tea in Your Hood is another one. That was like Look at Me, the title track, which is one of my favorite songs by him. I like it a lot. When X first started blowing up, like on SoundCloud, that was kind of the criticism from a lot of old heads. Is all this guy does is yell. He's just this angry kid whose beats are not mixed and it sounds nasty, and then he just shouts as loud as he can. I don't think that's entirely accurate, but I understand where that criticism was coming from. But then what you see is around that same time, he was doing these other really noisy tracks, which are kind of these weird melancholy sonic like collages. Like those would be the ones that are kind of like Rare, Wingridden Angel on the first disc, which are kind of really textural. There's not much melody. It almost to me sounds like Shoo Shoo or something, but kind of like probably by accident, right? Well, I mean, and I like those tracks, but like, do you know what I mean? Like, it seems like, especially at that SoundCloud phase, he was trying to make this really beautiful kind of serene music, but it ends up sounding very avant-garde because it's so fucking poorly mixed and it's just weird sounding. And then it's got this intensely personal, emotional, and it's also not very much fun to listen to. Like, I like that music, but when you listen to a whole album of it, you're like, God, this is kind of fucking upsetting for the reasons you said, but also just because it sounds so bleak. His third mode, and I think this is the one that when he really blew up, this is where you see his influence overall, even though he's stereotyped as the shouting, blown out beat guy, is this indie folk sad boy R&B thing. And that's what most of the second disc is, right? It's kind of like, it's like dashboard confessional R&B a little bit.
Yeah, no,
like
that's totally the fucking vibe I got. Well, actually, there's one song on here that I want to highlight. We've talked about that. There's Before I Close My Eyes, which literally sounds like that fucking Death Cab for Cutie song.
And so that's one of the better examples of it. I really like Moonlight and Jocelyn Flores are two, but those are also like, dude really reminds me of Chris Carrabba from Dashboard Confessional. And one of the things that I almost wasn't sure if I wanted to say this, because I didn't know if it would sound like I was making light of like the crimes he committed. His influences big time are, of course, like he's very into nu metal. And that kind of comes across, I think, more overall in his aesthetic and vibe. There's only a couple tracks here where that's like the main vibe, but it's like, I think a pretty steady pulse through is that he loved like Korn and Slipknot, especially Korn. But then it's also kind of like, it's like he combined the musical influences of like 90s rap and 2000s emo, but also he combined their respective types of misogyny. We really have
to talk about the misogyny, because the misogyny is so blatant. Honestly, his entire artistic career, he has so much misogyny too.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, people always will say, well, that's true of most rappers, and it is, but it's not like, okay, the only person I can, in terms of weird, offensive lyrical content, that I can compare X to, and hear me out on this, is R. Kelly, who also, I'm actually, like, musically, I'm a very big fan of R. Kelly's work, but we always talk about separate the art from the artist. I kind of think that is, like I said, I consume art myself, and I don't, think about the artist necessarily when I'm doing it, but those are two artists you literally can't separate the art and the artist from, because the thing that inspired X, his muse, the thing that lit him up and made him want to make music was abusing women. And that's true of R. Kelly, too. And that's outlined. The difference, I guess, is that X was so upfront about it, whereas R. Kelly would, like, sort of try to, like, hide it. And I'm not saying, by the way, that you shouldn't like whatever art they make, because I don't fucking care. I like a lot of it, But I think it is important to recognize when you listen to something. The thing that made him want to make music are these same feelings and these same tendencies that made him not just, like, a lot of these songs go into the emo trope of, like, if you leave, I'm going to kill myself. How could you do this to me? Now, that in itself is like, whatever. A lot of stupid emo bands do that. A lot of the bands he grew up listening to would have done that. But it fits in right next to these songs that have, this pretty explicitly, like, confessions of violence against women, and it all fits together. And one of the things that's weird to me is, like, it is kind of like Ling era rap misogyny, just, kind of 8-bit, shallow, like, fucking bitches and big titties and things. But it's mixed with this very particular sad boy misogyny. It is, like, very say anything, very Dashboard Confessional, and it's so weird.
And that's the thing though, Brian. He combines, talk about the genre blending, he combines the, like, white nerdy incel misogyny with, like, the black rapper misogyny.
Yeah, he truly does. I'm glad, because I almost didn't want to say that on the show, because I was like, yeah, it might sound like I'm trying to make a joke or something.
And well, to be fair though too, and I'm not saying necessarily that, like, all white guys, like, incel misogyny and, like, black rapper misogyny. There are plenty of black incels, there's plenty of white chads, and they both have misogyny. It's all very different. It's all very varied misogyny here. And actually, talking about misogyny, I did want to highlight one song here. So Kill Me, in parentheses, Pain from the Jail Phone, was literally written and, like, spoken through, like, the jail phone, basically being like, hey baby, I love you, blah blah, about, once again, the woman that he beat up so bad he ended up going to jail and was facing, like, 7 felonies for. And by the way, as somebody who, once again, I used to work in prison, and I used to overhear the phone conversations, and all the guys talk exactly like, oh baby, I'll give you the world once I get out of jail, baby, once I get all my gambling debt, blah blah, once I get off drugs and all those motherfuckers sound exactly like this. So I'm sorry if any women, no women listen to the show, by the way. It's all Sausage Fest who listen to this. I'm kidding, there might be women who listen to the show, but women out there, if you're listening to the show, right, and you find a guy who does something like this, you better run the motherfucker away, because they're all lying to you.
They don't know how to do those things. They don't even know how to not lie about.
Yeah, exactly.
So one of the things I kind of want to, I think we've, not to say like it's going to come up again throughout the episode. I think we've pretty well established that he's a bad guy. I think he's bad, but I wanted to kind of ask Taylor, what prior to listening to this was kind of your perception of cloud rap?
Well, I know we talked about it a little bit in the chat beforehand, but for the most part, I thought it was interesting. Not interesting that I necessarily liked it, but I liked the idea that people were experimenting. I liked the genre fusion. Some of the songs I actually liked. I'm a fan of nu metal. I can't fucking complain about genre blending and people doing weird shit over. I think you mentioned there's a lot of unpleasant music, but like a lot of the music I like and I think is pleasant is generally very unpleasant music. But I think at the same time, a lot of what I didn't like about it is very much exemplified in X as an artist, is that a lot of it's just doesn't really seem to have a point. A lot of it is, I think, very confessional to a fault. And a lot of it too is just a lot of these songs are so short that I just can't get a vibe to it. Like, and those are my three biggest problems with SoundCloud, like rap and whatever type of SoundCloud music in general. Like, maybe I sound like an elitist when I say this once again, but like, I need songs to have a lot more structure than just a minute and a half of you yelling over lyrics about how you hate yourself or how you hate your friends or how you hate women. Like, I'm a 31-year-old man. I need more than that to sink my teeth into.
The reason I ask is because cloud rap, basically what you've described, that's how most people feel about it. And it's not altogether inaccurate, right? Like, obviously there's variations on it, there's exceptions, but pretty much that's a pretty accurate summation of how most people, whether they listen to cloud rap or not, like a lot of people would say that short songs, not a lot of structure, weird mixing, it's experimental, but kind of, the lyrics are weird. They're very kind of off-puttingly like autobiographical. This is a genre that is kind of reshaped popular music. Like, if you listen to pop music now, it's a lot of mumbly songs about fucking doing pills. It's a lot like, this is not so much a surprise. Like, The Weeknd came out of the SoundCloud scene. Like, of course he did. Like, so this is such a weird and on its face uncommercial genre. It's all very DIY. It's almost by definition really poorly mixed. It's always peaking. It's, all this distorted bass, deeply antisocial autobiographical lyrics to, minute and a half long songs, but somehow it ended up being this huge cultural force for a few years, to the point where you can still see the lingering influence in like top 40 radio of SoundCloud. You've got these sad boy mumbly kind of folk hip hop songs that are pretty dark and moody. Actually, a lot of songs, like I said earlier, are now doing the minute and a half mark thing. I think there's algorithmic reasons for that and just streaming friendly reasons for that, which sucks. But I think initially that was a cloud rap thing because it was just these kids kind of shitting songs out. And I don't necessarily mean that as an insult. It's just the reality. Just kids trying to make music on GarageBand. And that's why a lot of the songs end up being a minute and a half long, initially at least. It's just very interesting to me. Such a pretty unlikable seeming genre. And I like some of this music, but like, who would have expected that this genre was going to kind of reshape like pop music,
Well, and Brian, I think that leads perfectly into why this is the capstone for our nu metalcore revival series. Because like, you could describe nu metal as that way too, 100%.
Yes, that's exactly was my thought when I selected this.
Like, that was another genre, and to be fair, they didn't have a minute and a half long songs.
No.
But it was a genre that was very uncommercial, very abrasive sounding, very unpleasant sounding music that, for whatever reason, really resonated with a lot of younger people, just like SoundCloud rap did. Although, I will say, I think the big difference, though, at least in Korn originally, although to be fair, some of those later bands definitely were a little bit more of this, but I would never have described Korn as nihilistic. I don't see Korn that way. I would say it's more about like a group therapy session in a lot of ways, like, especially on the first Korn album. Like, the song Daddy is basically just like a giant like fucking emotional like bloodletting. Like, that's essentially what that is.
That's fair. I don't necessarily think this because of what we know about X, but I know that a lot of his fans would describe their relationship with his music in the same way, as like a cathartic thing, a positive thing. So that might be a little more like of an eye of the beholder thing. Because I think some nu metal is a little nihilistic. Like, I think Slipknot were pretty nihilistic at the beginning.
Oh, no, I want to be clear. I definitely think some nu metal was nihilistic. And I personally think that X as an individual was extremely nihilistic. But
just his life. Yeah.
But if other people got meaning from that and were able to, find meaning, that's obviously great. But him as a person, he was extremely nihilistic. And, we talked about how Kurt Cobain was a big influence on him.
Well,
so
I don't know that Cobain was an influence on him per se. I'm just thinking about the way that his particular fan base has kind of like canonized him and his his death, you know?
Well, from what I've read, that he was obviously very influenced by nu metal and like grunge and stuff like that. So I
Yes,
wouldn't be surprised
yeah,
if he was
for
inspired
sure.
by Kurt Cobain and stuff like that. And like a lot of people have described Kurt Cobain as nihilistic, and to a certain extent, yes. I mean, in his personal life, he was very nihilistic too. But obviously, a lot of people got a lot of very powerful inspirational meaning from a lot of Nirvana songs too, and a lot of grunge songs in general.
One of the other parallels that I find between SoundCloud and then nu metal, especially early nu metal, is the kind of gnarly production choices. Because people kind of think about nu metal, right? Because it blew up as this really slick genre, especially if you think of, Chocolate Starfish, you think of Hybrid Theory. But kind of a defining sound of nu metal early on was kind of shitty production.
Yep, the Ross Robinson sound. The Ross Robinson sound.
Yeah. You get to Adrenaline, those first two Korn records. Actually, the self-titled Slipknot album, I guess, sounds pretty good from a production standpoint.
Oh, yeah, for a Ross Robinson album, it sounds pretty good, because Ross Robinson has been characterized as a very shitty producer, but...
I love that sound.
No, I do too. I think it absolutely works for the genre. And when people say he's like a shitty producer or whatever, I'm like, but it worked for the genre. So can you really describe it as
perfect.
Shitty? Like, he's not producing like Gloria Estefan albums or something. Like, I don't know why people are like, oh, this is the worst fucking producer of all time. It's like, no, it works for the genre. It's okay. It's
like,
fine.
I think those bands needed that production early on, even if it wasn't intentional, because so I do think actually the really slick production, the Chocolate Starfish production, the Follow the Leader production, it can work really well. Because nu metal to me is, we have different histories with the genre, and you actually got me into nu metal. Because to me, nu metal is like, even when I relate to it emotionally, I'm kind of listening to like the way I listen to pop music that I really love. I'm looking for a big chorus and some fucking gnarly riffs and stuff. So that big production can work. But I think when those bands were first coming out, that rough production probably gave them a heaviness that maybe people would have questioned otherwise. I feel like the Robinson production on that first Korn album is amazing. And when you hear them that way, it gives you a whole different perspective on the type of band they are. And I don't think this is an intentional kind of, reflection of the nu metal influence on SoundCloud, but it's the same type of thing where I think when Kurt's heard those fucking like fried out hi-hats and that blown out bass and that the screaming that was just all muffled to shit, I think there was an awareness that was like some kid like me that made that by screaming into his computer, right? And it kind of added to a mystique and the way that you perceive it.
No, absolutely, 100%. So yeah, no, I think this album is definitely my least favorite out of the four we reviewed by quite a bit. Although I do agree, I think this is a good capstone for our series here. It's obviously very indebted to nu metal aesthetically. There's some overlap in some of the songs here, but overall it's definitely more, emo rap was definitely more aesthetically influenced by nu metal, I think, than artistically in a lot of ways.
So since you bring it up, I knew that I wanted to end the series with kind of a cloud rap artist, and initially I was not going to pick X. And I kind of toiled with this for a while. So basically, as soon as we started doing the nu metal revival series, initially I wanted to do either Mario Judah or Die Lonely, who are more explicitly in their music, both influenced by nu metal. But I thought, like, because we're talking about the cultural influence and the legacy of nu metal, I thought it made more sense to pick like a very influential artist within the cloud genre, before trying to get into like fucking Mario Judah, who's like a living meme at this, you know what I mean?
No, exactly, yeah. So, like, when we first started this series, we started with literally the first nu metal revival album, which is that Suicide Silence Black Crown. And then, of course, we went to fucking Horror, which, implemented a lot of that stuff. And then, Loathe, which is another variance of, like, nu metalcore influence stuff. And now this, which, like I said, it's the culmination of a lot of different things that we've already talked about here. But, we talked about Mario Judah and Destroy Lonely. I'm only tangentially familiar with Mario Judah because you talked about how he's just basically a living meme at this point, and he's
so funny,
true.
Dude. And I like him. I think he seems like a cool fucking guy. He seems nice. He doesn't seem like a cloud rap psycho. Destroy Lonely does seem like a big psycho and an abuser, but Mario Judah does not. Mario Judah does not rap. He sings like a butt rock guy. He sings like David Draymond, but
which
he's
is
like
fucking awesome. That's actually really cool, awesome, to be honest.
But over kind of like synthwave kind of trap beats. Like he fucking rules. All of his songs sound like they're like either he's like a wrestling villain doing a promo or like doing the like opening theme for an anime. And then,
well, Brian, actually, before we go on here, I did want to mention that we forgot to go over our cringe generational moment thing. Did you still want to go over that?
I do. I thought we'd wait till we got to this end segment where we're kind of doing this wrap up. So first, though, I do want to, because you gave a ranking of your albums, or if you'd want to, if you didn't do a proper ranking. But I thought just to really make you mad, I would rank our albums here. So there's a big gulf between my top two and my bottom two. I'm just going to say that. My top two, I loved. Like, they're albums that I fucking jive with. My bottom two are two albums that I'm probably never going to listen to again. So my favorite album of this selection was Horror, which I picked it, like, of course. They're one of my favorite bands. We were supposed to see them together in October, and they bitched out on us, but I'm sure it's not their fault. I'm sure they have a good reason.
But we are seeing a new metal band the day after that, though.
We are seeing Korn in October. It was supposed to be like a new metal. We were going to see Horror, who I've been waiting years to see.
It was going to be a new metal vacation.
Yeah, for real. But that's going to be sick. But my favorite was Horror. And I don't necessarily think that was objectively the best overall. But like, for me, that album hit so many marks of what I love in rap and in hardcore punk and things. And just like, I love the kind of like the over the top, edgy, like horror aesthetic. And then my second favorite was, of course, the Loathe record. I let it in. I'd never heard before. I'd never heard of Loathe until they started telling me about them. But that was in a different way, a band that hit a lot of my marks. Shoegazy, it's kind of proggy, but it's not exactly prog, very technical, but it's not showing off, just very thematic in conception, just a beautiful album. This for me was actually, just in terms of how engaged I was listening to it. Look at Me, the album we're reviewing today was probably my third favorite. My least favorite of the batch, I think, was The Black Crown. Even though I think it's a better album overall than this, but it's the type of rock album where it's really hard for me to like keep engaged in. Whereas with this, because it's such a clusterfuck, I'm like, what the fuck is he doing now? And it's not always a positive experience.
But it is an experience.
Yeah. Whereas like when I sit and make myself listen to the Black Crown or albums like it, like I did like it a lot more because my memory of Suicide Silence is that I hated them like when they came out. And then I was like, oh, this is a good album. It's cool. It's got some cool new, I didn't like dislike it. And when I sat and made myself listen to it for the pod, I was like, oh, I really like this. I like the grooves. I like the riffs. But if I wasn't sitting down and forcing myself to listen to it, it was hard for me to have any like feelings positive or negative about it. But I am excited to do another album by them just because I was so surprised by it, because I thought it was going to suck shit, to be honest. Like,
no, that's totally fair, man. Listen, I had very similar feelings about Suicide Silence when I was in high school as well. I did not like them. I'm going to be clear. And it was for dumb reasons. It was not for good reasons, but I did not like them. So I totally get
when
that.
I heard them, they weren't doing stuff quite like that. I don't think they were doing the new metal thing quite yet. I think they were kind of like a screamo band.
They were still doing the deathcore thing for sure. When you would have been hearing about them in high school, they were still doing like the cleansing and stuff like that, which is also, by the way, an album I really like now. But it is one of those where all the albums are pretty uniformly, they sound very uniform. All the albums sound uniform in their own way, and for good and bad reasons.
That's the thing I look for, though. That is, I think, a positive. When an album has like a sound and a concept, not even a concept's the wrong word, when it's cohesive, But one of the things I like about the selections we picked are, you picked two albums that are clearly very reflective of your taste, and I picked two that I think are very reflective. Even though, like, I'm not a huge fan of this XXXTentacion album, I think that Horror and XXXTentacion, they show a lot of like what I'm interested in. So I'm glad that we picked those. And I think every album we showed kind of showcases a different like kind of angle to how nu metal influenced music. Because I think so Horror take a lot of aesthetic influence from nu metal, but they take it and they mix it into this soup of like hardcore punk and like hard rock and like 90s kind of boom bap. And it kind of like nu metal is one flavor in the broth, right? With Loathe, that's another band I wouldn't necessarily say sound like nu metal for the most part. They sound like Deftones. Well, they don't sound like Deftones, but they sound very Deftones influenced. But if you put them on for someone that didn't like nu metal, that person would be like, oh, this is pretty cool. They wouldn't think of it as nu metal. What that album to me shows is like a serious class of musician who would have grown up with like Slipknot and Deftones and Korn, who then like used the lessons they learned from these bands that a lot of people think of as silly or corny or whatever as like building blocks for this really ambitious type of music. Of course, in XXXTentacion's case, I think it's mostly aesthetic. He likes to be tough and scary and violent. And so obviously on a surface level, because he's like, was a young guy, there's a lot of things in nu metal that appeal to him. With Suicide Silence, you see nu metal creeping into a scene that like, I think a lot of people would have thought of Suicide Silence at the time as like post-hardcore, right? That's not a phrase I would use, but I heard a lot of people call bands like that, metalcore and post-hardcore, these, ostensibly underground genres that might have been like too cool. They're hardcore offshoots. Might have been too cool for nu metal. But you see like, oh, all of these guys grew up on this music. So like critically, nu metal was at this place where after a couple of years, all of these critics who probably don't even listen to that much current rock music decided it sucked and it was cringe and it was bullshit. And, Limp Bizkit caused Woodstock 99, all this fucking horseshit. And then we all kind of collectively, like, we forget about it. It becomes a punchline, but also we just sort of forget about it. And we all kind of pretend we never listened to it, right? Or we've kind of flattened it. So we forget what Slipknot sounded like. We forget what Korn sounded like. We flattened it into, oh, this is like funky rap metal in our minds. About like 10 years later, all of these artists are coming out who are like a little younger. Like they probably didn't grow up directly with the genre. They grew up a couple years after probably it came out. And for them, this is like classic rock. They've like incorporated it into their library of music, into their knowledge of music. And so all of a sudden you see this genre that was like a punchline for a long time has like festered and infected all these different streams of like alternative music, and it's creeping back into like the popular consciousness. And that comes to a head, I think, in the 2020s. I think it is the most socially acceptable time to like and talk about nu metal right now, which for me didn't make a huge difference because I only got into it in like 2016. But for Taylor, for music lovers like you and other nu metal fans, this must feel like, does it feel validating or does it feel annoying?
Oh, no, it feels extremely validating. As somebody who was a nu metal fan in high school, somebody who, like, literally the first album I remember being obsessed with was Follow the Leader. I remember, like, listening to that album and being like, oh my God, what the fuck is this? And I remember listening to it, God, probably like 50 fucking times. I mean, I would always skip songs like fucking All in the Family and stuff. A real Pride Month classic.
I always listen to All in the Family. I think that song is I'm sorry, it's fucking funny. It just makes me laugh. I'm sorry, dude.
It is, but it is definitely, if I was going to skip a song on that album, it would have been All in the Family.
Yeah, of course. Be honest. Of course. Fucking every track there is a fucking banger. So, but I think this had been kind of percolating and bubbling up for a couple of years. And I wanted to kind of do a soft segue into our generational segment. Normally we top the episode with it, but I thought it'd be a good way to tie it together. A couple albums have come out in the last few years that I think are, one a few years ago and one very recently that I think are important to our conversation. 2021, Limp Bizkit come out with the album Still Sucks. It's kind of a surprise, right? They headline Lollapalooza. Fred comes out in this great fucking outfit. You look fucking awesome. They fucking kill it. They play some new songs that just sound like some of the best songs. I really think some of the best songs they've ever done are on that record. And we're like, nu metal is back. We can talk about nu metal. Korn are having these really successful tours. I mean, it's getting this critical reappraisal, and it's still like, I think a lot of people, especially in my scene, because I'm into like post-punk and punk, are still kind of derisive of it. But it's kind of getting to more like, you can be like, no, this is like kind of an important moment in rock history. Like it is. Again, you've got people like all these rappers and like people like The Weeknd, who's probably the biggest pop star in the world right now, talking about nu metal. He's a fan of Deftones and Crazy Town, right? And what this ties into, I think, is like edginess. So I wanted to kind of, for the generational segment, talk about the concept of millennial edginess and how it is settling into middle age. I think that Still Sucks in a not always direct way is Limp Bizkit kind of acknowledging that. Obviously, they're taking the piss out of themselves, but I also kind of think it's about looking at how self-serious you might have seemed, although I don't think Fred was ever that self-serious, but he certainly could be, and saying like, well, we're older now. How can we bring this attitude into the current day without being like embarrassing? And I think even more
actually, one quick tangent. I do want to talk about you said Fred Durst taking himself seriously. For the most part, I don't really think he did. I think there's very distinct moments where he tried to, especially when he was trying to make more serious movies. So there's actually an interview where he talks about when he did The Education of Charlie Banks. That's the movie where he's like talking about his like literary influences and stuff like that and why he made the film and stuff. And that movie like name drops a bunch of like very interesting authors that, to be honest with you, I can't remember. He like name drops Hannah Arendt at a certain point. Like there's a lot of very interesting like literary references he drops in that movie. So he's very clearly trying to, it's also a modern adaptation of The Great Gatsby. So like he's trying to be like a serious artist at that point. And then when that movie made $0, he tried going absolutely goofy, and that's when he made The Fanatic, which I don't know, Brian. I'm a fanatic of The Fanatic. That is a fucking
we're gonna do it for the show, movie. Right? I mean,
we are 100%. That's the thing. If we ever do a Fred Durst, series, which I did a Fred Durst series for another podcast, but there's actually because he's been in 2 movies this year, or he's gonna be in 2 movies this year, which is fucking wild to me. He was was in, I Saw the TV Glow, and he's going to be in that new
Yeah.
Y2K movie. So crazy that the most prolific acting career he's ever been in is this year. It's fucking hilarious. Because he's only ever been, this will be the third movie he's actually acted in. Well,
you're going to love
actually.
I Saw the TV Glow. Like,
Well,
he's great in it, but you'll love that movie, I think.
He actually has a cameo. His first was a cameo in Zoolander, but then I don't think I picked.
Oh, yeah.
Never
Yeah.
mind. Zoolander, and then he was in Pauly Shore is Dead.
Yeah.
He was in Population 436, which was the first movie he was like an actual major character in, which is a really bad horror movie. Really bad.
If we do a Fred Durst series, I will select Pauly Shore is Dead. That'd be so fun to fucking do.
You know, my friend Jess described it as literally the worst movie they ever saw.
Disagree, but it's pretty bad.
Oh, that's fucking hilarious. But I'm sorry, Brian, but go ahead. I totally went off on a tangent there.
No, you're good. So Limp Bizkit still sucks, and they're back in. They're kind of a cult band now, but a pretty respected one. They're making cool party rock. They're funny. They're self-effacing, but they're fucking killing it, right? And again, I think that Fred is kind of on some level confronting, like, he can't exactly be the guy he was in the 2000s for cultural reasons, but also just because he's older now. More explicitly, a couple months ago, a figure who I would say is related to nu metal, whether he likes to be or not. So Eminem released a new album. I'm sure anyone who might hear this probably is familiar with this. The Death of Slim Shady album. And all I kept thinking about listening to it, I'm going to say right away, I liked it a lot. Like, I grew up listening to Eminem. I thought most of his albums after Relapse, they like sucked really bad. I revisited them this year and I was like, okay, some of this is he's doing some interesting stuff, but a lot of it's embarrassing. I thought Death of Slim Shady was like, I found it very endearing because it's the same thing. It's a 50-year-old guy going like, well, how do I can't stop being like this fucking edgelord. That's all I know, but I don't want to be mean to people anymore. And you think I'm making it sound cornier than it is, but that's like literally like the thing. He's like, oh boy, I love saying slurs, but I just want to be nice to people. But oh my God, it's so satisfying. And as an aging millennial, I gotta say, that's some real shit.
That's the thing, especially on this show, every episode I probably have to bleep probably 300 slurs Brian says. I'm going to be honest with you. I have to bleep all
but
the
I mean
slurs.
I mean them in a nice way. And I always use the A. And
you always use a soft G? No, for the others.
Yeah, I use a soft G. So this album, obviously Eminem is an old millennial icon. Like, he's like a patron saint for old millennials, especially hot couch guys, one of our favorite types of guys. But this is like a modern hot couch guy album. I'm at war with myself. The part of me that wants to be a funny badass, and the part of me that wants to love everybody and protect my friends because I'm so strong. Bizarre has a surprise guest appearance on it. And I thought, when I heard his voice, I was like, fuck, Bizarre is on this? What's he been doing? I was expecting this to be his first thing in like 15 years. Bizarre has put out like 13 albums. He never stopped working, I guess, which is crazy to me. And revisiting this, what I found is with nu metal's influence, some of the edgy stuff has been sort of filtered into different ways. Like, for instance, the Black Crown isn't really, I mean, metal is always, like, musically, it's loud rock and roll, so it's got some edge to it. But, like, as far as content, I wouldn't really say, even with the name Suicide Silence, they're not like an edgelord band, right? Those are basically like posse hardcore lyrics, that they're doing. So the thing that they're taking aesthetically from nu metal, if anything, is the like, don't fuck with me, this is who I am, I'm gonna be myself thing, right? Because there is a lot of edginess with nu metal. I don't think that's negative. I like edgy shit, but that's part of the deal, right? But they've kind of refined themselves to the like, I'm sticking up for myself, fuck you, you're not gonna bully me thing, which is another element of nu metal. XXXTentacion's, other than like aesthetically and then with, the way he's screaming, he does have metal tracks. He did a metal EP. There's only one track from this album, so I didn't really get into it. But his influence from metal, I think, comes from like the weird confessional nature of it. Like, I do think he was influenced by that to some degree. The like crying while I sing shit that like Jonathan Davis would do, this like unhinged, like cleansing thing. I don't think he did it to as positive ends as Jonathan Davis did, but I think that was something that probably affected him. Horror, this might shock you, Taylor. I'm going to say their big takeaway from nu metal probably was the edginess. Like, those are like some 2000s edgy boys that stepped out of 2003.
No, 100%. I would totally agree with that interpretation of horror. And I do want to say real quick, though, too, I did want to say my rankings of these albums. So obviously my favorite is Loathe. I mean, it's my favorite album I've heard all year. And I mean, it's the album I probably listened to the most in a long time. So of course, that's my number one.
It's great.
And then second is Horror. Is a great fucking album. I liked it a lot. Obviously I don't think all of it worked, but the stuff that worked really fucking worked for me. Then it's The Black Crown. It's not my favorite album of all time, but I think it's obviously a very good introduction to to, nu metal revival. And I thought, obviously, what they did as a band in helping usher in a lot of the artists we're talking about right now as like
an artistically and commercially viable style.
Exactly, 100%. So that can't be understated. And then this album, I just frankly didn't like for the most part.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be real here.
So,
like there are once again there are songs that work on this, but for the most part, I just did not like this. And listening to this actually made me dislike X more than I even disliked him before. To be honest.
To be honest, like when I picked this, I knew, and that's part of the reason initially I was thinking I'll pick Mario Judah or Destroy Lonely, which I think you might have had more fun listening to. Although Destroy Lonely is also a bad guy, to be clear. But I kind of knew that you weren't going to like this, but I was like, I don't know if he'll ever hear it otherwise. And I don't know if and I think it'll get us to a place for the new metal series. Do you know what I mean? I think it'll give us a good capstone. And I want to hear how Taylor responds to it as like a lifelong new metal fan. Because I don't have that relationship with the genre, but I know that you do. So I was like, oh, I wonder if he's going to find something to connect. And I kind of had a feeling you wouldn't, but I wanted your kind of insights into it.
So what I got more so out of anything else is, I think I mentioned this earlier, but when he's actually being like introspective and not a toxic nihilist way, and like actually talking about like, once again, not abusive lyrics that he's very self-confessional about, but when he's, being literary and like, actually being introspective and talking about his like actual fears of like, death and all that stuff, I think that stuff's very good. Like I was genuinely impressed by a lot of that stuff. So that's what I took a lot of it away from. Like for him being as contemptible in a lot of ways that he was, like the fact that he was able to create a lot of art that, or I should say, write some of those songs that resonate with me. Like if half the album was like Train Food, but not quite like that, obviously, because 12 tracks in a row would be kind of exhausting. But, having that same level of like lyrical skill, I would probably think this album is fucking fantastic, but it's just not. And also, I did want to totally mention too, because I remember you and I had maybe different opinions, but the last song here, True Love with Kanye West, I don't think we got into that. I like this song a lot, but I think you said you had some mixed feelings on that one.
I like it a lot, but I'm pretty sure I'd have to look it up because I'm not like I'm not an XX expert, but I think that this is a posthumous song that Kanye kind of did. I'm not going to say it. Talking about bad people, I'm a big fan of a lot of Kanye West's music. That is not a thing that I'm on the fence about. Like with X, it's like, oh, I can appreciate some of it, but he's bad. Like, I think Kanye, at least for a few years, was like a musical genius. For me, that seems like X had like a little melody. He had that verse there. And then Kanye, after he died, I feel like someone showed it to Kanye and Kanye was like, oh, I like that. And he did a beat and then he wrote most of the song. So it's like, I like it a lot because I like Kanye. I think he has a fun flow. He's definitely on that song. I just feel like it's more a Kanye song than a next song. But I could be wrong about that. Like, I don't know, maybe X like brainstormed it all,
No, totally agree. As somebody who I used to just not like Kanye West because I was the contrarian wiener, and I kind of still am sometimes. But even I'll admit that obviously Kanye West is a musical genius and very influential. And obviously now he makes a lot of very weird, unpleasant, in a bad way music. And he's obviously a Nazi now. Which
he's a Nazi now. I don't know what to say, man.
He's just a straight up Nazi now. And we're not being glib. He's just a straight up Nazi now. I mean, his personal assistant is fucking Milo Yiannopoulos, okay? Like, he ran his political campaign.
Milo's his manager now and shit. It's fucking crazy.
He hangs out with fucking Nick Fuentes. I don't know how much more clear we can make.
No, he went on InfoWars with Fuentes, and Alex Jones was like less Nazi than he was. He was like, I don't agree with that. I think what happened to Jews is bad,
Yeah.
And it's because he wanted to make money with Kanye. But, like, okay, that's the case. And maybe Kanye will continue to get worse and all that. I think it's sad that X had to have the life he had. Like, I'm not going to sit and, like, because it's so awful. It's so awful that this kid had to spend his whole life beaten and raped and imprisoned and then beaten more in prison. And, like, that was his life. And then he comes out and gets positive validation for doing all of these abusive and horrendous things and then recording it and, talking about it in music. And that's the only positive validation. That's why I guess, to be clear, when I'm not comfortable with saying, like, I don't care that he's dead, which I see people say, it's like not because I don't think he was that bad or anything. But with Kanye, I am very sad about it. Because I don't think Kanye, like, had to be that. Like, I don't know. Like, at a certain point, like, there's lots of people with mental illness like he has that don't say the things he did. But it's like he meant so much to a lot of people, especially a lot of old millennials. And it's like, what's going on? What is this? And then at some point you have to think, like, maybe this is the real him. Like, you tend to assume when you like an artist and then they go bad, like with him or with Morrissey, you're like, well, something happened to them. Maybe this is like who they were, and you can never know. Like, you can never really know because you don't know these people and it's stupid to think about, but it does suck,
Well, and we're going a little long here, but I do want to say one thing about Kanye real quick. No, it's all good. It's all good. This is obviously the capstone to our little series here, obviously. But I think with Kanye, right, is that this is just a trend that tends to happen a lot it can happen with white people, it can happen with black people, it can happen with Latinos, Asians, anybody, right? But like, there's a certain trend that, because Kanye West has always been very like explicit on like his political feelings about like American society, like ignoring black people and stuff. I mean, he went on that Hurricane Katrina thing with Mike Myers. He's like, it's George W. Bush doesn't care about black people or whatever. And like, obviously there certainly becomes a point where, and this happens to like a lot of people once again, where you have progressive ideas or you have this and that, you have ideas of the world changing and it doesn't change. You become just pissed off and you just are like, oh man, I was on this one end, and then you go to the other. I mean, that's what happened to a lot of 20th century socialists. They became fascists. The failures of socialism can often lead towards thinking that National Socialism is the way forward for a lot of authoritarian-minded people. And Kanye always struck me as a very authoritarian-minded person.
Well, Kanye believes in himself, which starts off positive, but like, and I'm not saying this inherently is good or bad. Kanye's ideology, in my opinion, is Kanye is concerned about his own artistic freedom and like access to like the means of production in his. That's why he's obsessed with like challenging the fashion industry, and he feels boxed out of it for racist reasons, which is probably true. But that is one of the things that made him start fixating on these weird conspiracy theories that led him where he is now, right? And it's kind of like his belief system is, I need to follow my muse and be able to be myself. Anyone that stops me from doing that is a suppressive person, in the words of Scientologists. But that is kind of how he thinks. He's surrounded with yes men, which is true of most very famous and very rich people. But because his impulse is to be contrary and to be defiant, he pushes people away, and then he's only got those people around him. And then he goes harder in because he can't admit when he's wrong. And now the only yes men he even has left are what? Nick Fuentes?
Yep, Nick Fuentes, Milo Yiannopoulos, and Alex Jones, and even Alex Jones is pushing back on it.
No, Alex Jones, it's Alex Jones, a piece of shit. We fucking hate him, but he did push back, and you see that, and you're like, God damn, Kanye. Like, so with X, it's kind of like, well, it's tragic that this guy lived this life, bad guy, he did monstrous things. With Kanye, it's kind of like, what did you do? Because he had so much goodwill, he had so much talent, and I do think at some point, like, I don't know the guy, but it seems like even by accounts of his family, like there was like a very good and caring person in there, and it's like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this to yourself? And why are you putting these horrible ideas out into the world? But why are you doing this to yourself? Like, this is destroying your legacy, which would have been, hard to measure before all this bullshit, before all the Nazi shit, which is what it is. And I guess we're all old millennials here. We all grew up listening to Eminem and nu metal, right? And in the last 20 years, just the general kind of cultural window of how we talk in public has changed in a very positive way. Like, you can have a conversation just with people in the room about Israel and Palestine. If, Taylor, in high school, could you have talked to any of your peers about like fucking Palestine? Would they have known what it was? No. So because of changes that have happened, probably some of them because of millennials, but a lot of them probably just naturally happen, the way we talk is shifted. But it also means that, I guess, if you can't change with that, you're just some weird old guy, right?
Yeah, some weird old fart, fucking yelling at the sky,
Yeah, you old man yells at cloud. And I guess X actually, I don't think X technically was a millennial, was he? He's too young.
Oh no, he was born in 1998. That's pretty squarely in Gen Z
he's
territory.
So, and I almost am thinking maybe being an edgelord and being younger, maybe it's bad. Maybe it's bad mojo. Like, you could be a millennial edgelord and you might grow out of it. But I think the lesson here is, if you are an edgy, occultist, 16-year-old Zoomer, you got to knock it off, man. You're going to abuse your girlfriend and die.
Well, Brian, you were talking about obviously a lot of these young guys, oftentimes, once again, in the SoundCloud rap genre and stuff like that, right? Like, grunge, which obviously was very influential to like cloud rap and stuff like that, especially with X, all that, right? But like a lot of those guys, they also died very young. They talk about the 27 Club and all that with Kurt Cobain, and, Lane Staley died a couple of years. Well, no, I think it was about 2002 he died or whatever, right? But like, I think it's interesting, right, is that the acceleration of this is that a lot of these like SoundCloud rap guys are dying when they're like 20 years old. Like, they're not even living that long. Obviously X
died
was
when he was 21.
Yeah, I was gonna say X died when he was 20. He didn't die of drugs. He was shot in an armed robbery gone wrong. I mean, I don't know how an armed robbery can go good, but it went really wrong. And Juice WRLD died of a drug overdose literally 6 days after his 21st birthday. I mean, it's like crazy how young these guys are dying. I mean, straight up. And it's really kind of sad in a lot of ways, because I don't know anything about Juice WRLD. I don't know if he had all the awful shit that fucking X did. What I was reading, I don't think he did.
Juice apparently, I mean, he had personal problems, but I haven't read anything about him or anything like what X did. But it is this thing where, so these kids, these young guys found this format that, say what you will about X, like, bad guy. But this is like this format that is really vulnerable, where they're really exposing themselves. And the weird thing about it is it's these kids with these really shitty lives. A lot of them are extremely underprivileged. A lot of them come from a lot of abuse. And they start making art about all this horrible pain inside of them. And then it blows up. And for a lot of them, it's the only thing they've ever had that got any sort of positive validation. And then they get like an army of like 35-year-old white managers around them just telling them, oh, this is great. Keep being this. Keep doing this. And of course, they fucking die. They get worse in whatever way they do, and they fucking die. And it's...
Brian, I forgot Little Peep too. He died when he was 21.
Yeah, same thing. Where these really troubled kids who do have a skill, they do seem to, like, even in X's case, I mean, not narcissist, the psychopath, like, did on some level like feel like he had something to say, but all he gets from that is, oh, this is so cool that you're talking about this pain you feel, or this darkness inside of you. You know what I mean? And you just kind of, I think that must fuck you up, right? For the only like success and validation that you get in your life to be from basically opening up your wounds,
Yeah, exactly. And in a very ugly way. And obviously, once again, we keep reiterating, X obviously did his own awful shit too, but it does definitely have to be like fucked up for you to always have to be opening that shit up, having to be confronted with. And to be fair, obviously that's how he got famous. That's how he was able to, I mean, I assume he was probably fairly financially well off at the very least. But, yeah, you're totally right. And also that's another one of those things where, talk about grunge too, once again, right? But like a lot of that sort of like, oh, well, I like the music because it's so real and it's this and that. And it's like, think about like the artists who have to suffer to make the kind of music you fucking like too. And it's like the only enjoyment you're getting out of it is just seeing how real it is because of just either self-inflicted pain or you're inflicting pain on other people. And that's the enjoyment you get out of it is really awful to me. And that's why I mostly stay away from that kind of music at this point.
I mean, I listen to a lot of that, but like, me, Taylor. I listen, like, that's my...
No, that's totally fine. If you can find like validation or find that interesting, that's totally fine. But at least for me, that just does not appeal to me whatsoever.
But I think the thing I feel when I talk to people about music is like, and we don't need to get into like our personal histories too much. When I listen to it at the time, but especially as I get older, I kind of have, I've been through my own stuff, or I am like dealing with my own stuff at the moment. And you kind of think about it in that way. But sometimes you do meet someone, and I especially see this with people who talk about like younger rappers right now, but you see it with people who talk about like Joy Division too, where they're almost looking at the violence or the pain and like the suicidal like obsessions and things, almost like they're looking through a glass case at a zoo, and they're like, wow, this is so crazy that this person's making music. And I think it's one thing to connect with something and relate to it, which apparently a lot of people felt that way about X, and another to like kind of gawk at it and go, wow, this is crazy. And I think you see a lot of that in the current age, with the social media age of like hip hop. You see a lot of these kids blowing up, whether it's someone like X who has a lot of mental illness problems, is extremely abusive and narcissistic, or like in the trap scene, got like these 18-year-old kids who are literally, they're like killing each other. And then a bunch of like middle-class white kids hear their songs online, and then they egg them on online. You know what I mean? These kids who will never be affected by this.
And now we're getting to the point where we have these like upper middle class and even upper class white kids like cosplaying as that too, with Little Mabu.
Oh yeah, Little Mabu is a friend of the pod. We love him. We love to see it.
I think it's interesting how much that's been co-opted though, because like you showed me some Little Mabu songs. I actually like him quite a bit. He seems like a funny guy, if I'm gonna be honest with you.
Yeah, he has a couple of songs I think are really funny. I mean, I don't know. So those two songs I showed you are really funny. The joke kind of, to me, wears thin fast. Those two songs are good. I don't need a whole album of that.
Yeah, 100%. All right, but yes, so I think, like I said, we've been running a little long here, so I think that is time for our final thoughts. Do you have any final thoughts before we get to our pluggables, Brian?
my final thoughts on this album, but really XXXTentacion in general. So I enjoy a lot of his music. I think he's an interesting figure. It's very troubling to listen to, on one hand, because the things he did are so awful and he's so vocal about them in the lyrics, but also because musically, like it is kind of inaccessible music for how popular it got. Production is weird. It jumps all over the place. Weird stylistic choices, weird mixing choices. It's hard for me to even say who I would recommend this to, because if you're a fan of like hip hop, let's say you like love hip hop of all different eras, still no guarantee that you're going to like X, because what he did stands out from most of that so much. If you like, let's say you like post-hardcore and emo, which is another big through line in X's music, still no guarantee you're going to like X. And I like a lot of this music, and I still wouldn't say, I'm still hesitant to full-throatedly say I'm a fan of it musically, because a lot of it never quite pulls together. Who I would recommend this album to categorically are people who are specifically big like fans of hip hop's history. If you like really like studying the history of that genre, I would say it is worthwhile for you to listen to an album, or at least, several songs by X, because it kind of gives you an idea of how rap got to where it is, for better or worse. Like, I don't even mean that in a judgmental way, but he made such a big impact so quickly on the genre and on the genres beyond it. You can see his influence on current rock and on pop music now too. It's crazy. I think this is a good album if you want to see what X is all about and just pop your head into it. But again, I don't know if I can imagine. I know a lot of people love his music, but I don't know if there's like a unified type of person. I don't know if someone that loves trap would necessarily love X. I don't know if someone that loves screamo would love X. I think it's just, there's like an X person, I guess. And I don't know if you are one or not,
No, totally. I'll echo pretty much everything you said there. And like I said, I'd heard a few songs from X beforehand, and I liked enough of the songs, but like I said, getting into a lot of the personal stuff really just soured my mood on this whole album. I think it's one of those things where if you already like X and you're already posting online about it, or you're tangentially familiar with X, what we're going to say on here probably won't sway your opinion all that much. But I will say, if you're going to listen to this music, and just this kind of music in general, just don't wallow in the fucking misery and nihilism. That's all I'm gonna say. Like, get whatever positive meaning and talk about obviously how open he was about his feelings of depression and suicide and OCD and once again his narcissism and stuff like that. And if you want to take some like maybe therapeutic or more meaningful things out of it, that's great, but don't wallow in it, because if you try to wallow in this shit, it's not going to end very well for you.
Sometimes, especially when you're a kid, I mean, I agree with you, it's not good to wallow in any sort of negative feeling, but sometimes when you're a kid, you gotta wallow.
Totally. And I'm not saying, obviously, like, if you do it for like 5 minutes, it's awful. But what I'm just saying is, like, especially if you're a kid listening to this, I'm not going to say it always gets better, but let's be honest with you, the vast majority of the time, it'll get better.
I guess related to what you said, Taylor, I would say if you're going to listen to music, and I listened to a lot, like when I was a kid, like late high school or early 20s, I listened to a lot of Shoo Shoo. I listened to a lot of I Hate Myself and 10 in the Swear Jar, like really bleak bands, like bands that in terms of their darkness, probably comparable to like X. What I would say is if you're going to take in a lot of negative media, and especially if you're going to take in a lot of hateful media, because like it's the same as like if you're going to listen to someone like X or someone like R. Kelly who did this monstrous stuff and it's reflected in their music. Because like Michael Jackson may have done monstrous stuff, but it's pretty divorced from his music. Not the case in say X's case or R. Kelly's. If you're going to listen to stuff like that and you're going to enjoy it and you have your own relationship with it, fine, cool. I think that's great for you. Truly, I do it too. But I do think it's important to be aware of what you're hearing, to be mindful, even if you love X's music and there are things emotionally that you identify. Because there is stuff, so this is a thing where Taylor and I differ. There is stuff in here that I relate to, like more when I was younger. But I always, when I listen to it, go, but this is like a young kid who didn't know a lot and was fucked up and treated people really horribly. And if you're going to make the choice to listen to music by people who have done really bad things, I don't care. I would say just don't give them money and think about what the message you're taking in from them is and what they're saying. Be aware of what you're hearing and consider how potential victims maybe feel when you prop them up. That's the big thing that I would say is like, if you want to sit and listen to X and he's your favorite artist and you have this strong emotional connection, fine, who cares? Especially now that he's dead, because it's like, you don't have to worry about giving him money.
He's been dead for like 5-6 years. It's just, that part's totally fine.
But I would say, like, if you talk about him in public, if you are gonna like talk about how much he means to you, think about how maybe that makes people who could have potentially been victims of him feel, you know? And musically, like I said, it's just hard for me to think of, like, I would say I'm, pretty well a fan of a lot of his style, but I still have a hard time saying, like, oh, if you love this music or this, you'll love X. Because it's such a weird thing. The fact that it resonated so much with so many young people is kind of insane. Everything about this artist should not work.
No, but for whatever reason, it resonated with a lot of fucking people. That's for fucking sure. All right, so that is the episode there. So let's get into our pluggables here. So, of course, as always, you can follow me at Carlos Chantor on Twitter.com. And as well, please follow us and subscribe to us on both our Spotify and our YouTube channel, where we are uploading every episode simultaneously to both platforms. And as well, as always, please donate to the Lucifer and the Father campaign. Our good friends Scott, Sean, and Robert are making a fantastic series here, Lucifer and the Father. They released episode 1 quite a while ago at this point, but they need more funds and more support to continue the series on. So please donate to them. And if you can send us an email, put a YouTube comment verifying that you donated to the cause because of us, we will within reason match your donation to them. So please donate to our good friends Scott, Sean, and Robert to make this series a reality.
Yeah, please. We always say friend of the pod is like a bit, but truly, those guys are friends of the pod. We love them. As well, please follow Millennials Are Old Pod on Instagram and the Millennials Are Old Facebook page just to keep abreast of new episodes, anything else that, we feel it's screaming at into the void. And send us any cringe generational stuff. If you see a cringe boomer, a cringe zoomer, cringe gooner, send them my way because I need to know what they're doing. I need to know what the zoomer, boomer, gooners are doing. I need to see them. I can't keep up with all of it, you guys. I refuse to get a TikTok, which would probably really help me find cringe millennials, but I just won't do it. So I need your help.
It's going to be banned pretty soon, Brian, so you won't really have to worry about that too much longer.
Yeah, that's true. What if TikTok was the platform where I was finally going to blow up?
To be fair, it could. Maybe we could post bits on the last 2 weeks of TikTok. That'd be fucking hilarious.
Do we do the millennial pause?
We do not, actually.
We do.
Well, I always edit that out. I want to be clear.
Yeah,
I always edit out the millennial
That's why
pause.
I'm asking you. I was reading about it today and listening to people do it, and I was like, I think we do that on the show. And I was like, I know.
No, we 100% do. Well, that's the thing, though, is that Zoomers are so psycho that they're just like, the second that their phone turns, like, hey, there's a baby, and they just like scream into the phone. It's like, oh my God, what the fuck? And to us as millennials, millennials, we're much more modest. We're far less enthusiastic about things. We try to think about things.
Millennials are known for their modesty.
Oh, Jesus Christ. But yeah, so Brian, do you have our socials to plug as well?
Yeah, please follow Millennials Are Old Pod on Instagram. And yeah, follow us, the Millennials Are Old Facebook page. I follow lots of weird boomer pages. I mostly spy on them. I try not to touch the glass too much. Some of them are very sweet. Some of them are insane. They're boomers. But please, if you have some weird cringe millennial content you'd like me to see, something just fucking insane, especially if it's a TikTok, because I won't see it if it's on TikTok, please send it to me via the Millennials Are Old Facebook page.
Yes, absolutely. Please send us your, boomer, zoomer, gooner, goofy goober, whatever cringe you have.
Your goofy goobers.
Crooner cringe, just all of it, please. And, speaking of cringe, Brian, I'm going to be cringe as hell by going to sleep, but not eternally like our favorite SoundCloud rappers. Okay, that was bad. I'm sorry. But I think it's time for us to go to sleep and contemplate all the spiritual, lyrical, miracle genius displayed on this album here.
Yeah, I just ordered a vintage D12 baseball shirt, so I'm going to wrap up in it like a big blanket. It's about a 4XL, so I'm going to wrap up in it like a cocoon and go to bed.
And by the way, Brian, I think as well you should go to sleep with a very 80-plus-year-old black woman's shower cap, fucking bizarre did.
I was trying to find a shirt of him wearing the shower cap. It doesn't seem to exist.
It's such a good picture, too. It's awesome.
Straight up, I bought a new outfit to wear to the horror show, and they canceled, which is fine. It's still a cool shirt, and I got some cool pants to go with it. But, I was going to buy some fucking fresh shoes. I was going to buy some high tops.
I was so disappointed when that got canceled because I was going to buy a ticket, but I just never got around to it because I was hoping to get an e-ticket for it. But apparently I don't have to worry about that anymore.
Yeah, they don't come to Portland every year. So I've been waiting for them. All right, sorry.
Fucking lame.
We got to go to bed, I guess.
But yes, we are going to go to bed. Have a good night, everybody. And this is the capstone to our nu metal revival series, but this will certainly not be the last nu metal album, or at least nu metal influence thing we review.
No, I was thinking it is possible, probably not for a while. We might do a follow-up series to this, I think.
Yes. So we're going to leave that as a cliffhanger. So have a good night, everybody. Sleep well, sleep tight, and don't let bed bugs bite because they're awful. They're really
Don't
awful,
let the
trust me.
SoundCloud rappers bite because they bite really hard.
Yes. All right. Have a good night, everybody.